And today's sponsor is Reconciled. Reconcile invoices your clients, pays your bills, and delivers clear and accurate financial reports every month automatically. Ready to streamline your financials and prepare your business for the next big step? Visit reconcile.com today.
Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling.
And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Bakari Akil, and he is the founder of Graves Hall Capital. Did I get that right?
You said it right.
All right, cool. You smiled. I was like, oh no, did I butcher it after all that? I used to joke around all the time. I said the first 6 months, I don't care if your name was John Smith, I butchered everybody's name. It was an ongoing theme. I would stutter, mispronounce them, whatever. Let's just start off right off the bat, man. You're a really cool guy, done a lot of stuff. You travel the world right now. We're going to get into that just for fun, to get people to kind of know who you are. Let's start off with your origin story. How did you end up on a show about mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah. So my background, so I'm currently the founder of Graves Hall Capital. I've bought several companies. I bought a burlap bag manufacturing company called NYP Corp earlier this year. Bought an educational technology company. I completed that deal a couple of years ago. The year before that, excuse me. I did the first deal, the NYP Corp deal with a private equity firm. The deal before that, I did that with a family office. I've worked in corporate development, buying companies on behalf of other corporations. And I also teach M&A or ETA, I should say, entrepreneurship through acquisition, teaching the MBA candidates at Cornell's business school how to buy companies. I've been doing this work for our M&A work and transaction work since probably around 2015, 2016. That said, my introduction to this space is a lot different than what sort of standard. My background, I didn't go to a business school. I didn't get an MBA. I actually didn't even finish my undergraduate degree. I went to Morehouse College and dropped out because I wasn't able to afford the school. Around 2015, I was sitting around and asking myself, why am I not rich? Like, what is going on? Why don't I have more money? I thought by the time I got to 25, I was going to be far more wealthier than I was, and I was struggling at the time. And I started looking into like, what could I do to go from here to success? And I came across this concept, this leveraged buyout concept, by just reading a lot of personal finance books. And they would talk about what it took to save money in your 401k and all those types of things, which I was starting to do and starting to participate in. But all I started asking myself is, think that that's what Mark Zuckerberg did. That's not what the guys who had like enormous amounts of wealth, what did they do that's different than that? And I knew starting a business made sense, but I didn't have like a really good startup idea. So what are the options? And as I mentioned, I came across the concept of a leveraged buyout. And once I actually like understood and consolidated and understood what it meant to actually apply it, I was like, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard. I can go and borrow money from the bank for an existing business that's already up and running. I don't have to go learn this business. It's already existed. I don't have to create it. I'm going to find the employees. I got to find the customers. It's all of that stuff is all there. And all I got to do is organize the money so I can get this done. Oh, well, sign me up. And so I just started looking and learning and getting deep into this subject. And ultimately ended up taking a class. I sat in a class at Columbia Business School. Basically, I learned that they were teaching this subject, Harvard and at Stanford, and they were just now starting to open up and share the same content at Columbia. And I wasn't a student at Columbia Business School, but I lived in Harlem, which is the same neighborhood that Columbia Business School in. And so one day when I realized that this class was being taught there, I just went to the business school and sat in the class. And that was how I ended up getting introduced to the space and ended up connecting and meeting with investors. But it all started with that work. And so there's a direct line from that activity all the way to where I am today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. One of the things you said during there, which kind of caught me off guard there, is you didn't finish your bachelor's degree, but yet you're teaching at Cambridge.
Mm.
That's an impressive a feat, right? There's not everybody. I've been I have multiple college degrees, and I've been an adjunct professor. Sometimes they bring me in to teach certain things and stuff, but I've
Mhm.
always had to show my credentials, right? I have an MBA, I
Mm.
have undergrad degrees and stuff like that. If they want me to teach, it's just a course or something. It's because I meet all the check boxes. For you to
Mhm.
teach a course at Cambridge, it means that you've got personal merits and personal achievements that they overruled any type of educational checkboxes they needed for you, I think. So that in itself says something. It really does.
Thank you.
So
Just for point of clarification, I teach at Cornell's business school.
yeah,
By teach, I want to be very clear so that there's no confusion. I'm not a professor. I'm a visiting lecturer.
yeah,
As you just said, my personal merits are what the students, they are hungry for people who have personal experience, who have tactile experience, and can speak to what it's actually like to be in the trenches, as opposed to just sort of that academic understanding around entrepreneurship, which can be it's harder to find a solution to these types of problems of how to organize and find capital when you haven't actually yourself gone out and done the work. And so that's the reason why Cornell's invited me for several years now to come and speak to their students and teach this subject that they're very much interested in learning.
I just interviewed David Dotson. You know who that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I sat in Tim Bovart's class, which he taught at Columbia.
Hmm.
What I usually don't mention is that I also booked a flight and flew to Stanford, and I sat in Dave Dodson's class as well.
Yeah.
So I was committed to learning about this subject, and I would have done the same thing at Harvard Business School, but at the time that class had already wrapped, and so. But yeah, I learned from both Tim and Dave Dodson.
It's interesting that you said you're studying. Is that like a auditing a class, or is that because you're not
Yeah,
getting a
it's
grade? You pay a fee
I'm
and you
not
go to
getting a
class.
grade. I wasn't getting a grade. I'm a formal student. I was infiltrating the schools of higher learning
I'm just curious. Did you
to
pay?
learn this.
Let's get clear here. Did you pay a fee and like audit the class? Or you just showed up to where the class was and went and
I
sat in the back?
showed
Man, I
so
love
I
I I absolutely love that,
That's
right?
right.
So
The information of where the course was being taught was publicly accessible on the school's websites. And so
yeah,
once I figured out who was teaching the course, the times and dates that course was available, I just went to the school and sat in the class. In fact,
um,
that was how I ended up that was the first time I was invited to be a lecturer. And of course, the professor there was so impressed by my willingness to go learn this subject and to go and sit in a class to and specifically that in later years he would invite me back to speak to the class about the fact that I did that and what it takes beyond just doing that and the willingness to go this hard to find companies and to negotiate and complete transactions. It requires a sense of boldness, a sense of sort of getting over the imposter syndrome that
mm,
we in our early 20s were experiencing, and to be willing to this is very difficult, putting together multi-million dollars to buy a business that's been in somebody's families for sometimes generations. And, for instance, the company I bought, NYP Corp, truly has been in that family for generations. It was founded in 1946. It's almost 100 years old at this point. And so um, to be able to speak to a business owner and explain the value proposition, it requires that same thing, that same place that I pulled in our willingness to want to learn the subject from. I was willing to go to that extent to learn the topic. It
yeah.
takes that to do
I
the
think the
same.
word I want to use is moxie. Yeah, I think moxie. It just says something that your passion to learn it overrode any logic that you would have had to discuss to talk you out of doing what you did.
That's
Right?
right.
It takes something. It really does. it's one thing to pay for some money and go sit in a class and, try to figure it out. It's another thing to go, look, I'm going to go figure this out, whether I've got the money to do it or not.
That's right.
Right. And at this career, I've done a lot of different things in my life. Bought in real estate, owned a real estate, had software companies, worked in software companies. Mergers and acquisitions is so dynamic and so changing, and
Mhm.
so every deal's different.
Mhm.
That if you don't have fortitude, if you don't have that moxie that you just inherently nature seem to have, you're not going to get very many deals done, right?
That's right.
These things take 6, 8, 9 months on a minimum, 12 to 18 months on not unheard of. Sometimes longer. Some of these deals, these mergers and acquisitions, the big guys, they've taken years to get them done. I love what you're doing, man.
Yeah.
So, anyway, let's go back to you. So you audited or not audited, you said in these classes, I don't even use the word audit because there's a formal process for that. You went
Mhm.
and got the knowledge you needed. And then what did it look like to start applying that knowledge? So how did you get to talking to, you just kind of stepped right over the SBA game and sounds like you just went right to like, who's got the big money to do the big deals. But, what was
Yeah, I
that?
mean, I would I don't want to give the impression that I came into this with the idea that I was going to just do big deals. When I came into this to just do exactly what David Dodson and Tim Bovard taught.
Yeah,
I wanted to do the exact small business, use the SBA, raise a search fund. I thought that was going to be my process. And what I experienced when I tried to do that was rejection from the search fund community and backing my search because I didn't have a lot of the qualifications. I had hustled a lot of the knowledge, but I hadn't gone and gotten a lot of the things that they thought were the prerequisites to be able to do this thing correctly. I was a little surprised by that because the search fund community is predicated on hustle and being willing to do things that are way outside of what's considered the norm. And so when I was receiving the pushback for going after the size deals I was going after, like I put up and organized transactions that were $5 million and $7 million. I'm using the SBA program, corralling investors in that route, and experienced failure, and consistently as I was navigating that. And so when I ultimately came across one of the larger businesses that I worked on, or the first large deal that I worked on that closed, the educational technology company, I reached out again to that community and was rejected, but was accepted by the independent sponsor community, the people who were in that space and who had been doing these types of deals for a long time, and recognized that the structure and the deal that I had put together was exactly the type of deal that they wanted to do. And so ended up linking up with the family office that had her feet both in the independent sponsor world and in the search fund world. And so had interacted with me and met me at conferences that were related to the ETA world. And we organized the financing for that deal and it ultimately closed. Shortly after that, I was in the middle of working on the NYP transaction and pulled in a private equity firm that also had a tie to the independent sponsor community and was interested in doing these types of deals. And so that's ultimately why I was able to do larger transactions. It was actually the rejection that I got from the search fund community or the search fund investors at that time.
I love it. Till you know, and you're like, "Gosh, show me." You know? You "What do you mean I can't do that? Watch this."
Right,
I
right.
like that. It's that moxie, man. It's the true heart of the entrepreneurial spirit.
That's
You're
right.
gonna I'm gonna figure this out with or without you. I'd love you to join the ride, and, if you don't, then I'm gonna go to the next bus or the next, limo or whatever will pick me up, and we're gonna do this thing. I appreciate that. That's a unique trait, and not very many people have it. I'm raising 2 kids right now. I have a daughter at 7 and a son that's 12, and my daughter is
Mhm,
this fireball of a red hair, blue-eyed, self-determined, person, and
mhm.
I'm trying to play this balance of she's got that fire, that spirit to determine what she wants to do, and nobody's changing her mind. So I don't wanna just like, as a parent, part of you wants to crack that so they just mind, right? But the
Mhm.
other party says, I spent my adult life trying to put adults back together and give them back that fire.
Right.
I'm not allowing anything to take that from her.
Mm.
But, like, there's part of me that's like, if you break that spirit young, it's
Yeah.
still hard to give it back to 'em when they really need it in life, right? That
Yeah.
when they needed to be determined and nobody can tell them no, and they need to stick with something, that's just a trait that I think a lot of kids have that people kind of train them away from, or what do you call it, break that. It's like,
Yeah.
it reminds me, I grew up on a farm, like, like break the horse, like the horse is a little bit
Hmm.
spirited, you break it so it's easy to ride. People
Hmm.
break children all the time, make them easy to listen to and mind. So long as she's not hurting herself or doing anything that was really bad, I'm gonna let her stick to her guns.
Yeah. There's an interview that sort of echoes the same sentiment
Mhm.
that you're sharing with the father of Serena and Venus Williams. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the stories around his life. Just like I think last year, Will Smith released a biopic detailing his life. But there's a fascinating moment when an interviewer is talking to one of the Williams sisters and asks them, do they think they're going to win, and they're like, absolutely, no, there's no question whether or not we're going to win. And they respond with such confidence. And the interviewer says, why do you have this confidence? Like, where do you get this confidence from? Like, why do you believe, like, in the face of all this, that you would have that confidence? And their father jumps in the middle of the interview and he says, do you hear what she just said? She said she's going to do this.
Right.
Why would you question that? Why would you try to put like thoughts of doubt in this young woman's mind? Like,
No.
accept the fact that she's that confident that she's going to win and leave it at that. There's so many things around that are trying to like push that feeling down in people and children and women. Um, Let that feeling thrive, because that's where you get the success from. And so,
Like,
yeah, I can understand where you're coming
let's go to these 2 acquisitions, because
from.
you didn't go to the SBA or the Small Business Administration to get a $5 million, you bought one of the largest, was it burlap? I grew up on a farm. The only thing I think that still uses burlap is like feed sacks, right? I
That's
don't know what
exactly
else.
right.
Yeah. I,
That's exactly right. So we sell burlap bags to farms, to food producers. We sell them as sandbags,
mhm.
for particularly for emergency response when there's like floods and stuff like that. So yeah, there are a lot of surprising and there's a fashion thing that's starting to come out with burlap, where people are using bags for personal shopping and those types of things. So there are a lot of uses for the bag. The goal with burlap is, or what burlap represents, is a natural fiber that can replace plastic when necessary. And so it's a good alternative both in the growing process and in the consumer process.
There's some interesting stories back in the Great Depression that when the burlap companies figured out that people were having to make clothes out of them, they started making bags that were more decorative and had
Oh
patterns
well.
on them. And it's interesting story if you ever dig it up and read up
Mm.
on like they would make burlap bags for like flour and other stuff, and then
Hmm.
the families were making dresses for their daughters and stuff out of them. So they started making them more decorative and making them nicer so that,
Hmm.
it didn't cost them much more, right?
Hmm.
But it turned into something better on the other end for the customers.
Don't be
That was
surprised, based on this comment that you're sharing, if in 2 or 3 years you don't hear that there's a fashion portion of our business that exists. I hadn't heard about this story, so I'd love
yeah,
to look into
Google
it.
around it. It's pretty amazing it was done back then. It's just one of those, you know, the world there are good people in the world no matter how bad you read how some of the industry titans really were, right?
Hmm.
They're still good in the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
even in the worst of times. So that company's been around for a long time. I can't imagine there's a lot of innovation in what needs to change as far as a lot of companies you can buy and go, well, they need a modern website and they need a modern this
Mm.
and they need a, you know, I don't know what you could change. How do you do something different or make improvements? You just move out of the way and let it run.
So there are a lot of things that we're doing at NYP Corp um, that are updating the processes and the infrastructure of the business for modern times, to include like rebuilding the website. We're creating some just there's things I'm trying to be sensitive to, like to our strategy that we haven't yet shared to the public, but there are a lot of things that we're getting ready to announce that I think are going to be very unique and different from the different growers in our space who import burlap and sell. And so I'm excited to see where we take this.
I'm excited too because you pick something that we're kind of moving back towards, right? We're trying to move away
Hmm.
from plastic, trying to move back
Hmm.
to something natural, organic,
Yeah.
sustainable. Everything I just mentioned there, burlap is a direct image of that, right? Cool. So you still did you have an exit from the previous one, or you still have that on your family office, the educational software company?
The family office deal I structured in a way where the majority of the value for the business came to me very much early, and so for the most part, I'm out of that transaction. And so it was good. It created the largest windfall that I experienced in my career to date, which also supported me and made it possible for me to complete the NYP transaction. And so um, I was very happy with how that transaction played out,
Did you
and continued going.
did you play more of a deal finder role for them? Like, you found out what they were looking for, you negotiated a deal, put together, and they kinda bought you out of the position too, or do you still own it?
Sure.
Don't share anything to get yourself in trouble for, right? I know we
Yeah,
have all
yeah,
these
exactly. I'm trying
NDAs
to
and
be, yeah, I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that to that. So what I'd say is, what ultimately happened with me on that transaction is,
Mm,
and one of the reasons I still define myself as a person who's in the search fund world is that my goal since I started this process was to find one company to buy and run full time as CEO. And I still have that ambition.
mm.
And so the fact that I'm not the CEO of NYP Corp and I didn't become the CEO of the educational technology company, I still would like in the future to ultimately end up sitting that role. And so when it became clear that I wasn't going to sit in that role for the educational technology company, I restructured the deal with me and the investors I put together. And so that's ultimately why it ended up playing out where I didn't end up being the CEO, but the transaction closed. And so that's a way of me describing what happened without being as NDA breaking as I could.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. There's certain things we can't talk about and stuff on these
Yeah.
deals. So that was a decent windfall. Do you mind, I know I'm not gonna ask for a direct number, but was it like, in the six-figure range, or was it better than that? Or I
Oh,
mean, it set you up.
way, yeah, it was well over six figures, but yeah, it changed everything for me.
I imagine that's a hell of a windfall, especially for somebody who, you know, may or may not have had you had the fortitude to go get any education you want, but part of me says there might have been some financial concerns too as to
Yeah, there
why
was
you just didn't
definitely,
go pay an audit for a class
yeah,
or something. It's like, I'm gonna, you know
there were definitely the financial concerns, but what it really did was it created the working capital for me to go and do bigger and more successful transactions, which is NYP Corp is just the beginning of what I
Mm,
think is going to be the future of this firm, Gravesall Capital. And so that's how I see it. It wasn't just for like covering bills or something like that. This is
right.
really the capital that I'm using to accelerate the business.
Now, I'm gonna take a step back here because 'cause I'm really curious. You went out to Now, did you go to the broker route, or how did you how did you source we're gonna walk through the one or both of the deals real quick, not
Sure.
at a high level. How did you find the deal? Like, what was your sourcing mechanism? Were they brokerage listed or that? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, deal sourcing is a big part of my approach. Like I find my deal sourcing to be really the critical piece. Like what else should I be spending most of my time on other than making sure that the pipeline is as full as possible? And I have basically three approaches to deal sourcing. The first is, the brokerage approach. And so from the jump, when I started back in 2015, when I was taking the class and all that, the other thing I was doing was I was pulling lists of business brokers from the net, take them to my own private Excel sheet where I would have access to that data. So first name, last name, email address, phone numbers, the whole nine. And I would go on Google and type in business broker New York, business broker Connecticut, and all the people who would show up, I would just add them to my list. Ultimately, once I started having a little bit more free capital, I would go to like the association websites, the ACG, the IBBA, at the time thinking back to 2015, it's not like that today, but at the time, the membership lists for a lot of these associations were publicly accessible. They just put their names, the email address, and everything right there. And so I would hire people using Fiverr to download those to basically go on the website and do data entry. So they would just type in first name, last name, email address, phone number, and just add a list. So from my meager start, where I would have maybe like 100 or 200 names on my list from just people I was able to source from the net. Once I added an IBBA and all the other associations, the AMAA, Association for Mergers and Acquisitions Advisors. Once I added all of those people into my list, now I am sitting on like a list of like 1,000, 2,000 people who are on my list. And then I added in the investment bankers who did deals directly with financial sponsors, private equity firms, et cetera. And so at some point, to this day, I was sitting on a list of like 4,000 advisors who were doing deal transactions. And so on almost a quarterly basis, I would reach out to every single one of them with my criteria, letting them know that I'm interested in doing a deal, or I want to do more. And so ultimately would come across deals from that. One of the first deals that I was working on that I got very close to closing, but ultimately didn't. I had reached out to one of the brokers who was our investment bankers who was at Wells Fargo. Now, Wells Fargo, gigantic firm, investment bank, what would they have available to me at the size that I was looking for? Funny enough, he had just had this experience where he was talking to somebody he knew who was looking to sell their company and said, listen, my bank is too big for this transaction. You guys are doing, are going to sell for about $10 million. We usually do like $100 to $200 million. But I had emailed him just at that same day. And he was like, I actually know some guy who just reached out to me. And it looks like, based on your website and everything, that you're looking for a business of about this size. Would you like me to connect you to? Yeah. And that was the first deal that I was actually able to pull together the financing. I got the commitment from the bank, the whole nine, and got very close to closing that transaction before it ultimately failed. But that was how I started building it out, just reaching out to business brokers and investment bankers. So as I said, I had three sources. The second source was I would reach out, going online and finding lists of business owners, and just reach out to them directly. And again, on a quarterly basis, reaching out to business owners. And so how I came across my first transaction was I was able to find a list of Connecticut business owners, and the education technology company happened to be on that list. And so I reached out to on that list, and that's the CEO followed up with me. And we ultimately met in person. He got a sense for my authenticity, and got a sense that he could actually trust me to move this transaction forward. And so we executed a letter of intent, and then I used that letter of intent for me to go outreach to the family offices, which ultimately did the transaction with. And then lastly, I have a weekly event that I hosted up until very recently in New York, where I would bring entrepreneurs and investors together. We would talk about deals that were available to invest in New York. And in this forum, we had people would bring startup deals, real estate deals, and private equity deals. And I would invite people very wide and broad, 40, 50, 80 people at a time. And we would talk about deals. And in that space, I would let people know that I was looking to buy a company. And from that, people would tap me on my shoulder. Hey, my dad is selling a construction business. I don't know if that's something that's be interesting to you. Let me know. To connect you if you want. Oh, I know this guy is selling another business. I work as a broker. I'll introduce you to them pretty soon. And so that was, sort of like the social approach, then the last email approach to both business owners and to brokers, and then hopping on the phone, calling people directly, particularly when I saw a business that looked like it was interesting. So that was my approach, and it remains my approach today.
And today's sponsor is Reconciled. Are you an entrepreneur or business owner thinking about your exit strategy? Or maybe you've just landed a business through acquisition and the books just aren't the way you need them to be. Let me tell you about Reconciled, your dedicated partner for industry-leading virtual bookkeeping and accounting services. Reconciled pairs you with skilled professionals who empower you to grow your business and prepare for success, whether that's your exit or taking that new acquisition to top performance. Imagine having high-level financial management without expanding your team. From bookkeeping to CFO services, tax advisory, and even fully outsourced accounting, Reconciled has got you covered. They help you make the best business decisions, keeping your end goal in mind. And the best part? Reconciled understands acquisitions, as they have acquired 3 accounting firms in the past 3 years, and their founder, Michael Lee, mentors others in searching for acquisition, raising capital, or trying to aggressively scale. Reconcile invoices your clients, pays your bills, and delivers clear and accurate financial reports every month automatically. Ready to streamline your financials and prepare your business for the next big step? Visit reconcile.com today and let them get your books in order. Reconciled, making bookkeeping a breeze. That's reconciled.com. That's impressive. It's like you didn't count on one thing, you didn't do just direct mail and send out 10,000 letters and hope that people
Mm-hmm.
responded. You did a really thorough marketing campaign. Um, and that's my background. I have a
Yeah.
master's degree. My MBA is in marketing, and I've been trained in a couple different marketing systems since my MBA. Funny thing, I get out of the college with my MBA and realize that all the stuff they taught me in my master's degree really don't work out in the field unless I'm working for Coca-Cola and trying to create a brand.
Right.
So, went out and got trained by Jay Conrad and Levinson's crew to be a guerrilla marketing coach and understand low cost, high impact marketing strategies. And then
Mm-hmm.
realized I needed better writing skills and went and got trained by Dan Kennedy and those guys on how to write copy for myself. And those two
Mm-hmm.
things have made a big difference in my world. But
Yeah.
you've put together a pretty dynamic approach. Like even for me, when I'm in a search, I don't do all three, right? I
Mm-hmm.
should. I get busy with this pod. I get busy doing other stuff. I have some stuff going out, but like I don't send any letters at this moment that are not
Mm-hmm.
digital.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a direct mail guy. I mean, I made
Mm-hmm.
most of my money in real estate sending out letters. Let's talk about what did you learn in those ETA programs, setting in those classes that enabled you to structure a deal at the LOI
Yeah.
stage at some point that was so appealing that you would get the big guys, the family offices. I mean, because you had to know what they were looking for and how they structured deals in order to put something in front of them. I used to say in real estate, hey, if your deal's good enough, the money's going to come,
That's
right?
right.
If you're not getting money for real estate deals, you're not negotiating great deals. You figured that out, somewhere. I almost said early in the game, but I don't know your pain, right? I don't know how many
Mm-hmm.
times you failed before you figured it out. Uh, but you figured it out, and now you've got a system down where, like, if you don't have the funds or the ability to stroke that check, you know how you need to structure it, that deal, so that somebody that does have that ability
Yeah.
can pull that together.
Yeah.
So, what is
Yeah.
that?
I mean, a shout out to David Dodson. I have actually never said this publicly before, but one of the things that I experienced when I reached out to him very early in looking to raise money for a company is he gave me a piece of advice that I stuck to, which is to not pursue a transaction that's under $1 million in EBITDA, because there's just not enough cash there
Mhm.
on the EBITDA size to attract investors. And at the time, I was reaching out to him about a business that had like around $400,000 in EBITDA, and
Right.
he was like, "It's just too small. You need to go after something larger." And I thought at the time, $400,000 sounded like like a ridiculous amount of money. And so
I'd take another 400K right now. I mean, I
exactly right. And so for him to say, "Listen, it's just too small." It's funny when I talk to people in the real world, and I say, um, a company has $1 million. Um, they're like, "Oh my God, that's massive." And then I talk to people in our world and we say a company has $1 million and we're like, "Oh, okay, that's small business."
yeah.
It's such a fascinating disconnect between the way we see the world and the M&A professionals and most people as they navigate the world. But that $1 million cutoff made it possible for me to eliminate a lot of businesses that would have made it through the cut that shouldn't have been, and I wouldn't have been able to go to people like Dotson and others and have an intelligent conversation about a company I'd be interested in buying. And so that was the first piece of advice. When it came to structuring for me started very simple, which was the SBA has certain guidelines that will make it possible for them to commit to doing a transaction. And let me make sure I don't violate those guidelines. And if I can structure the deal against those guidelines, more likely than not, I'll be able to get the SBA. But once I started jumping over the SBA guidelines and to kind of do these transactions, the same criteria that the SBA was using were still successful. They were still good transactions to do as long as I followed that structure. It just would be one or two additional things that the seller would want or that I could provide that the SBA at that time would not be willing to accept. Although, excluding the fact that the size of the transactions would just be too large for the SBA to absorb. But things like at the time, the SBA was not willing to let you do equity rollover for a seller.
Right.
And so if I was going to do a transaction and included that clause, that forced me to have to go outside of the SBA. And there are other clauses like that that you have to be aware of when you're navigating the SBA. You can't have the seller stick around in a management role for the transaction for some period of time. And so these are things that the SBA would not allow. And so when if I was working on a transaction where the seller wants to stick around as CEO, that means I'm not going to be able to go after the SBA as a capital source. And so by getting as close to and understanding the SBA guidelines, it gave me a rubric. And then using that rubric is ignoring certain things that may not be appealing for the SBA allowed me to just structure my deal against that and use that to attract the capital that I needed on the equity side.
That's amazing. That's really cool. Let's go back to the deals real quick because I have a question I'm sure other people are thinking. The first deal you did, how much, if any, of your money did you put in to get the deal done? Were you working on the side and you funneled in a big down payment into this thing, or was it all money raised by private investors and funds and family offices?
So far, I have not had to myself put in any capital into any of the transactions that I've done. I've
So,
been able to structure my transactions where, and this is something that I learned was far more common. And so practically, or I see myself as a part of the ETA world, the
mhm.
entrepreneurs through acquisitions, the search fund people. That's the world that I see myself in. But from a practical standpoint, I actually operate as an independent sponsor. And the rules of the game for independent sponsors are different than for search fund entrepreneurs. Search fund guys, generally speaking, have to put up some capital for the transaction. And if they don't put up some capital for the transaction, it's coming out of them in other ways, meaning they have raised money using the search fund. And so they have to pay back all the money that they raised for the search fund plus premium for taking that capital on a risk basis. And so if they raise $400,000, they may have to return as much as $600,000 once the transaction has an exit to pay back the investors for giving them the $400,000 up front so that they can finance their search, right? In the independent sponsor world, there are multiple forms of compensation, but one of them includes a closing fee. And that closing fee can sometimes pay back a lot of the diligence costs that the sponsor put up to complete the transaction. Or sometimes it can just be a cash that paid to the sponsor to essentially say, thank you for putting the transaction together and for it to look the way that it does, and paying them for the work of putting that deal together. And so that's just one form of compensation that is not accessible to search fund and ETA people. And so I put together my transaction. I'm talking to my friends and they ask me about what I do with this. And they say, well, how much money do you have to put up? And I say, I actually don't put up a lot of money. I actually get paid when I buy a company, which is unusual for people who are in the ETA world to hear. It's a different way of thinking about it. Where in the ETA world, more often than not only are you doing all the hard work of structuring the deal, but once the deal closes, it's just your money and now you have a business, but you haven't gotten actually a windfall of cash that comes alongside the business that you own, that you and I operate.
So what about the other aspects, right? Like, happen to have a perfect credit score and happen to have like educational background. The
Mhm.
SBA says you have to kind of have either educational background or industrial background. You seem to have bypassed those two in the way you've set it up, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, this goes to using capital sources that are more amenable to different pieces. So
mhm.
with the SBA, yes, there is that educational component that can sometimes play a role. But as I mentioned, the earlier transaction, the one that failed, didn't fail because the lenders didn't want to back me. The lender did back me, knowing all of the educational stuff and et cetera. So the education thing can be overtime. The industry concern and industry expertise concern can sometimes be resolved by key managers staying in place and committing that they'll stick around in the business for as long as the loan is inside the company. And so
Mhm.
that's how I solved that whenever I would deal with the SBA.
Mhm.
But once you leave the constraints of the SBA, it's really the deal structure that you put together that defines how things are going to look.
Well, I'm really impressed here. Probably out of 190 something interviews, nobody I've interviewed have at least admitted to me doing what you've done, right? You've carved off a niche inside of this that's above the SBA loan, kind of in the ETA world, but you've presented yourself as an independent sponsor. You're doing what a lot of people say is impossible, which is a lot of people are saying there's no such thing as these zero down deals. Quit pitching that and quit selling that. you're doing them, right? You've got low down, zero down. I'm sure you have expenses. I have expenses,
Right.
just for search and support and help and that type of stuff, assistance and stuff.
And
But you,
I don't want to give the impression on to anyone listening that that you should come into the search fund space or come into really any investing space attempting to pull off zero cost transactions where, you don't put up anything and you get everything. The first thing on my side is there's a lot of time and a lot of grind and a lot of waiting and a lot of patience that goes into doing this. And so if you're like, I'm going to buy a company and it's not going to cost any money and Bakari did it, so therefore I can do it. But I'm going to try to get it done in 3 months. I'm going to be the first person. The NYP transaction I started working on that deal in the spring of 2021. It did not close until the spring of 2023 or the winter of 2023 or the January, February. That's almost 2 years of working on that transaction. So there's opportunity costs, there's a bunch of stuff that you're bypassing while you're waiting 2 years to complete a transaction. And so there's no free lunch. There's no I'm getting it for free. It's going to cost something. And so be willing to go through that toughness and that grind, and not expect to be able to get some great business for no money. I don't have to do it. I would echo the people who say it's impossible. It's also impossible, but there are times, rare moments in the fissure of the world where like something can happen, but it's usually when you're dedicating an enormous amount of time and have committed to dedicating more time in the future.
and I've written full articles like, look, there's some dangers. And like for a lot of people who want to own 100% of a company and they're trying to do it no
Yeah,
money down, I was like, you got to understand that you got to switch your whole shift your whole
yeah,
search. You have to hunt down something that has insane profit margins. Because if
hmm,
you're going to do 100% financing, whether it's from the seller financing and or multiple sources, now you're paying interest over time. You've ridden a company that's never had debt with debt.
hmm,
And like all businesses have cycles, like you got to make sure that you can cover your debt, your debt coverage, you can cover your expenses via cash flow. Not now, not this moment when everything seems to be going good and you're selling the company because it's on the incline. But what happens when it goes through a down cycle? When's the last down cycle? What caused it? And can you still
right,
support your debt structure, throughout the next down cycle? And people don't get that. I've written whole articles like, look, I think that there's a finesse or sexiness of zero down deals, but understand if
hmm,
you 100% finance something, like, you want zero down, own a business for 2 years and then have to lay off 50 people and run 50
right,
families' lives because you didn't understand that it had cycles and it can't support the debt through the down
right,
cycle. A lot of people don't get that. What you're
yeah,
doing is a little different because it isn't a zero down deal. It's the investment banks, the family offices, the private equity funds, they're funding the transaction.
that's right,
You've structured something they want, and you're getting paid at close, and I imagine you're retaining some form of
that's
equity
right,
position in the company so that you get distributions over time and get
that's
a
right,
get a second check later on if it sells again.
that's right. And an incentive to try to grow the business
Mhm.
during the time that we own the business, so I can get access to that additional equity piece.
I'd be interested in, hypothetical, what's the range that you could continue to own? Is it, 5, 10%, or is it more? Or on the
So
equity positions of these things because 'Cause
yeah,
they're funding the whole deal. Is that okay
so
to talk
there's
about?
yeah, we can talk about that. And then the search fund world is very similar, which
Mhm.
is that you get some portion of your equity upfront when a deal closes. You get another portion of your equity based on a time scale. So, 1 year, 3 year, a fifth year, sort of additional buy-ins. And then lastly, there's a performance aspect that's associated with your equity. And that's really where the kicker is. And if you do, if the business returns X amount of capital, both to the investors and or to the investors, and also pays off the debt over whatever those hurdles are, that those hurdles trigger certain portions of your equity promote. And so that's a very similar structure to most independent sponsors. And I'm not too different from that as well.
Awesome, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
that's great. So what's somebody other than trying to now the word's out, David and those guys are gonna be watching their classrooms a little closer so that we all don't go crash on their courses. Probably can't pull that off as easily today as we maybe could. Maybe one of us could, but not,
Mm.
not don't everybody go out to do that because they'll put a security guard at the door. Other than that, where's a great place for somebody to figure out because what you're doing, like the game that you're in, um, I don't know that there's a like, I've taken some of the courses from different people. I don't know of anybody that's doing what you're doing,
Mm.
which is good.
Yes. I mean, so there's an entire world of independent sponsors who structure deals that look very similar to my deals.
Mhm.
And some of them have been in the game. Like I know one of the people who actually coined the phrase independent sponsor.
Mm.
So there are people who have been in this game for far longer. I don't think there's a book. I don't think there is a yeah, I don't think there's a book. I don't think there's a existing piece of written material about specifically the independent sponsor game. Then the search fund world, though, is as close to the knowledge that you would need to structure these types of deals. Uh, and so anything that's connected to the search fund world and entrepreneurship acquisition, buy then build, the HBR guide to buying a company, there's a bunch of other books like that. Those will all be acceptable midpoints between what they do and what I do. There's a ton of YouTube resources, videos, and all that that exists. And then there are books about people who have done this process. And the one that I like the most is the story of, or the autobiography of Reginald Lewis. I don't know if you've heard that name, but
I
Reginald
seen a
Lewis, he
video
bought,
you did, you were in some big house, you're pointing at a picture of him. Yep.
yes, that's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually the Harvard Club I was inside of. And when you walk into the Harvard Club, as soon as you walk in, there's a gigantic big picture of Reginald Lewis. He was one of the largest single donors to the Harvard Law School, which is where he attended. So he never had a business degree either. That said, what's exceptional about him is that in the 80s, he bought a $30 million company with none of his own money, or $22 million, excuse me, $22 million company with none of his own money, which he sold around 3 years later for $90 million. And then shortly after that, he bought, I think it was actually the same year, he bought a $985 million company and became the first Black person to own $1 billion corporation. And then he wrote a book about it called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And so it's one of my favorite books where he just details his independent sponsor journey. As I mentioned, the phrase has been coined independent sponsor very recently. And so he was doing these types of transactions in the 80s. And so he
I'm
talks about how he structures the deals, how he sourced the capital, how he found the businesses. And he went through an enormous amount of time where he wasn't doing transactions, meaning he was pursuing deals and transactions would fall apart, pursue a deal, transaction would fall apart. And so, knowing his story really gave me a lot of inspiration, and a lot of people who look like me the inspiration to try to pull off this thing that we became aware that it was possible through inspiration.
So it's interesting is, I'll read that book because it sounds very fascinating, and I always joking around and tell everybody I'm the whitest guy in my family. I'm our family, my wallet is around here. I'm a card carrying a Native American, but I look like my mom. So if I show
Mm.
up to family, people are looking like, "Who brought the white guy?" Because everybody else is Indian, Indian,
Mm.
Native American. I'm always rooting for the underdog. I love when a woman's in this space. I love that you're in this space doing what you're doing because it
Thank
is
you.
predominantly dominated by old rich white guys, and,
Right.
while I look the part, my heart and soul is for all the underdogs out there. So kudos to you for what you've done. I love who you are and what you're up to. I look forward to reading a book about what you've done in the future because I see you on that path.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
You're not far off. In 2008, a journalist wrote an article about me and the struggles that I was dealing with in my life. At the time, my family I grew up on donated food, and I was struggling to pay for college, this and the third. Um, and uh, and she published this article in the New York Times talking about that part of my story. She and I have just recently reconnected, and we're talking through what a memoir might look like, and pitching it to some journalists, not journalists, to publishers, excuse me, who publish these types of stories. And so, yeah, it may be much sooner than even I expected, the outcome for a book.
I do appreciate you here. Let's before we go, is there anything that myself and or my clients or customers or listeners out there in this space, anybody that happens to be listening to this show, is there anything that we can do for you? Is there
Yeah.
something you're looking for, something we can help you with?
Let's see. Stay in touch with me. My email address, I'm sure, is in the notes. I'm
Mhm.
perfectly willing to talk and connect with anybody. I'm there. My website, Graveshall Capital or graveshallcap.com, which is where you can find some background on me. LinkedIn, I'm connected there. And so if you want to stay in touch, I'm traveling around the world right now. So I was in Cape Town 2 months ago. I was in Athens last month. I'm in Spain right now. Tomorrow I'm flying out to go to Turkey and I'll be there for the month. I'm traveling with this program, a 12-month program called Remote Year for people who travel and work remote. And so I'm detailing a lot of my experiences with on this platform I created called Nomad Noir, just highlighting my experience as being a digital nomad traveling. And so if you want to see what it's like to live outside the world and also work, you can follow me there as well. And so those are the experiences and places you can connect with me. I would love to stay in touch.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate having you here today. This has been one of the funner shows I've done in a while.
Thank you.
I love anybody who's got moxie to do what you're done and truly designing a life you want to live and going out there and living it, man. There's something to be said for that. So we'll call that a show. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hang out for just a minute. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between $5 million and $30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.